Yes, perfect. So, welcome everybody to our webinar of Green Roofs for Biodiversity and Beyond European Perspective. Welcome, and we are very glad to be able to provide this webinar for you for free today, thanks to the sponsor support. Four companies supports us today: Lecker International, Sechs fürs Grün, Dachgrün, and Formglas. And I can move to the next slide. And our agenda for today is a short introduction, two presentations from our speakers, and Q&A session in the end. First, I will shortly present our organization, European Federation of Green Roof and Living Wall Associations. Our organization was founded in 1997 as a non-for-profit organization, as an umbrella organization for all green roof and wall associations in Europe. Currently, we have 16 members from 18 European countries, and we are members of big extended networks of people who are really interested in making world and buildings green. We are very glad to cooperate with you. We have our pages in LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. We will share all the links in the chat, so you're welcome to connect to our pages to stay updated with our latest news and join our next webinars. This is a short information for all who are interested in green topics. This is a World Green Infrastructure Congress, which will take place in Berlin in end of June, from 27th till 29th of June 2023, but it will be also possible to join it online. This is the largest event on this topic, and it will include all the aspects of building greening, and we will also share the information, the link with you today in chat, and we ask you to check the information, and it's still possible to join this event as an online or offline participant. It will include 2 days of lectures. There will be more than 100 speakers, if I remember correctly, and it will be a huge trade exhibition there on site. And the third day will be dedicated to excursions to most interesting green places in Berlin. But if you join online, I'm also sure it will be very interesting for you. So we will share the link with you. You also see the website address on the screen, and you are welcome to join it to learn much more about those topics there. This event is organized by German Green Roof and Living Wall Association in the partnership with World Green Infrastructure Network and our organization EFB, and I'm sure it will be very interesting for you if you joined us today to be there as well. And I have an honor to introduce our two amazing speakers for today. First of all, Nathalie Baumann from Switzerland. She's lecturer, research and consultant, and research group Green Space Development and Institute of Natural Resource Sciences. And Dusty Gedge from United Kingdom. He's the president of European Federation of Green Roof and Living Wall Associations, and also a very active person in companies in United Kingdom, and he can tell more about himself, our expert in biodiversity. I'm very glad we have an opportunity to hear to them today, because our goal as European Federation of Green Roof and Living Wall Associations to share knowledge and best practices, and to be able to hear for such speakers. It's a great pleasure for me personally today too. So yes, it's not a Q&A session now. I close my presentation, and I ask Nathalie Baumann to present her presentation, and I mute myself. Thank you.
So thank you, Tatiana. Do you hear me?
Yes.
So until I can just say some words about me. So thank you, Tatiana, Dusty, the EFB, inviting me to this webinar, and I welcome everybody who is joining in, and like to hear about our experience and what we do in Switzerland, and of course experience of Dusty later on, and then our exchange. Maybe many of us know that we just know each other since many, many decades, not only years. And we're trying to, just to green the world and promote the biodiversity in any sense, not only green roofs, but also with just any measures in the city, because as you heard, I'm an urban ecologist, coming also from the biology perspective. And one of my drivers is really to promote biodiversity. So, of course, it's a special start as we are in Switzerland. We don't belong to European to EU, so therefore let's start it with a special way to start this presentation. So actually, yes, is a kind of just introducing a little bit where we stand concerning the biodiversity in general in Switzerland, and then have a focus, of course, of green roofs, because we just that's the main topic we're going to deal today. And just to see where we are actually in Switzerland, and what is going on, and where maybe are the lacks, where are the difficulties. Okay, so Tatjana, please, you can switch the slide. So yeah, so where are we in Switzerland? Biodiversity, next slide, please. If you look at this graphic, you can definitely realize, maybe in some perspective, sometimes people say, well, Switzerland is, wow, this country with the democracy, whatever. So, but considering the biodiversity crisis, I really have to say I'm not proud about that. And since many years, we're just lagging by long way behind in comparison to other European countries. And you see it really, we are like the last on this graphic. And we have really also, let's put it that way, a special situation in Switzerland. We have different habitats, biogeographical regions. So we have actually, it's a task for us, an important task, to protect our biodiversity from the Alps, from the Midlands, from the Jura. So we have really different habitats. And so actually we're not really good in that. And I will, of course, explain you what's happening. Why is it that way, and why is maybe other countries far ahead considering that? One thing is, of course, and this is actually cool, because we already just last week there was a new publication from the Federal Office about nature conservation and biodiversity crisis, and how many species we still have now in Switzerland. So there was actually a new print, a new out of monitorings, etc., from the last years. So you can really have the really actual conditions we face now in Switzerland. And you will see that actually the quality, the quantity, and the connectivity of habitat conditions are really bad in Switzerland. So we have about 48% of ecological valuable habitats that are threatened. And these are, for example, and now I'm really on the big scale, are dry meadows, or even forests, some parts, but also the alpine regions are really threatened also, because on one side of the climate change, the temperatures are going up, and also on this level, latitudes or altitudes. Please, you can change the... If you speak of habitats, of course, you come down to animal species, plant species, and there is a general overview, figures about 35 of the animal and plant species are threatened with extinction or have become extinct already. So, of course, this is something we have in common. We're talking here about mainly specialist species. They have quite a difficult to adapt to urban areas or to fragmentations. So is it either ground nesting birds, or is it amphibians, or is it reptiles, etc., which have also difficult life cycles or very special life cycles that makes really hard to find still natural sites where they can really go through the life cycle to have a stable population. We can swap, exactly. So here you have a summary of what was printed last week. So actually is also the laws or all the instruments we have in Switzerland, which actually we have a law based on protection of natural habitats and species, etc. But if you think about the democratic system we have in Switzerland, where we also as citizens participate a lot with it, and we have elections and votations, etc., makes it difficult because it goes 3 different dimensions down. We have the federal laws, we have the cantonal laws, and we have then the community or the municipalities. And the most actually autonomous and the most important is in the end are the municipalities, because they are the one to decide what they're going to do. They all get from above actually the guidelines, the laws, etc. But to implement it is on this basis actually, and that makes it actually difficult because we have several cantons which are a bit different than the others. So that's also this kind of speciality with Switzerland is not all the same. We can't be all the same, so that's one of our brands, but that makes it difficult if you have really to imply actions, if you have to imply strategies. We have a biodiversity strategy to bring it really down. So you see, so we have less actually and insufficient surfaces which are protected. We have lots of fragmentation, we have lots of building, construction areas, so the agglomeration is getting bigger and bigger, and actually the less surfaces which are kind of natural are getting less and less and shrinking. And also the agriculture, which is very important and dominant in Switzerland, takes a huge part of it. And so you have this is cars, streets, construction and agriculture, which are really the ones taking the space away and fragmented. So, and if you think back how big Switzerland is, so then you will realize we are not a big country. And in that case, it's the space is really scarcely. We can switch the next one, please. So in that way, we have laws, we have a strategy, biodiversity strategy and action plan as well, but it goes very slow, as I said, because of these different political dimensions. But what we can do is actually take initiatives, because we are 4 times a year we can vote. So this is one of the initiatives which many NGOs and unhappy organizations since many years took and started to say we have to do something really now against the decrease or the biodiversity loss. And so therefore this is one of the biodiversity initiative which is running now. So we don't know when it will go in front of to votation, but just to let you see that we are not waiting and doing nothing, but is in the end, if we can participate a lot, it's a long procedure to get this initiative done, and then they will come in front of the whole country to be then voted about it. And of course, this biodiversity initiative asks really that we have to take action. We have to protect what we still have, and we have to promote more. We can please change. An important role as well, and we slowly come back now to the focus of today, are the cities. So we don't have like London or Paris, like mega cities, but still Zurich is one of our metropoles, Geneva, and then Basel City. And in these surfaces, also in Switzerland, we realize since more than 20 years that we have lots of animals and plant species coming towards the city, to the agglomeration, using these spaces because of the microclimate, because of the potential of food, depending what kind of species it is, and also nesting possibilities. So these numbers are increasing in a certain way, but also if you look about what kind of species you will find there in the cities, you will have lots of opportunities or generalists which really can live with this and adapt very quick to these human conditions, let's put it that way. But also you will have on the edges of the urban area or settlements, you will find some specialists, but these are threatened as long as this skirt is just being developed and defragmented. So we have to be careful and not to be like saying, okay, it's a good sign. We have it in the cities, more animals and more plants than outside in the countryside. So we have to manage both sides actually to have that kind of imbalance and to promote more and more. So next slide, please. Now, going to the focus of the green roofs and green facades. We are known since many times that we have like kind of laws also on the cantonal and municipality level, in depending some regions, not everywhere. But let's say that's going back to 20 years and even longer than that. We started to develop actually guidelines, recommendations, standards, some built up on what the Germans have done before, like the FLL, for example, and their experience, because they started far long ago than we did. But we just jumped, let's say, on that movement and tried to develop a Swiss kind of way with the green roofs, as we thought, and there is the city of Basel, a main playing role in all this development, is really to look at these green roofs, the flat green roofs, actually extensive green roofs. I'm talking a bit more about that here. And to see that as a surface which is not really used, which is like, but has a good and high potential. So that's the moment where the city of Basel decided, but from an energy perspective and not from ecological perspective, to promote these surfaces in order to let's grow their biodiversity as an ecological compensation surface. Because this is one of the paragraphs in our federal law of the protection of habitat, genetic and also species, is actually to use these surfaces which are not really used, which are empty, is it underground or even on the buildings, as a compensation surface to let develop their nature and biodiversity. So we also at the time developed standards, as you see it before, and we also started, is it good, you can change, thank you. We also started to promote more and more within the last 20 years within whole Switzerland and also internationally, this idea to have actually green extensive roofs as a biodiversity hotspot or ecological compensation surface, where you just really have to plan it in a good way with quality that you can really have an establishment of species on there. So even also in the French-speaking part and the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, where I work a lot and also teach a lot for professionals, we could bring in within the last 10 years all these ideas, and just to support cities, for example, here, the city of Lausanne, who started 8 years ago to how can we promote our roofs, and they did really a good work. They also did aside research. They did also good sensibilization, communication work. So this is all parameters we have, which have to work parallel to get really the people to think about it and to do something. So the owners, the construction business, etc. And also our in Geneva, let's say sister University of Applied Sciences, EPIA, they also started a bit before Lausanne to do more research, more focused, and also I accompanied them within that. We just really had also biosolar combination, so tests on the substrate, tests on the seeds, on the plants, and to see what happens there and what kind of species will establish there. So you really see, like, this is a kind of picture to show you like the diversity of what happened in the last 10, 15 years in Switzerland, in actually the main part of Switzerland with research and with application within cities. Next slide, please. And of course, on the federal, now every country has the issues with the climate change. So actually, at the federal level, in the last 3-4 years, new documentation came out from the Confederation, which would talk about city and heat in the cities, which have a program which is climate adaptation. So actually, when they start to publish documentation on which we also are mainly mandated on. So that's the point where the canton and then the municipalities will start to adapt their programs to what was established and developed and published on the federal level. So you see, we have now, since 2019, different fields of action and different topics which urge now again to say also to green roofs, to green facades, etc., but also on the street level to do something, trees, parks, etc., water in the city, and so on. Please, next. And one before quickly. Also, also the synergy between biodiversity and climate change. This is one point we just try to bring it really on and on in the communication. It's not the either-or situation. They are completely linked to each other, and we have to talk about parallel and together about it. And here is actually also from Proclim, which is the Climate Institute of the confederations on a national level. They also just support that and show up with this kind of icons and sketches what could be done in the city and what is important. Next slide, please. And here also other example of cities just bringing in new guidelines, documentation based mainly on that, what we have done in Basel City more than 20 years ago, but also Basel City on the right-hand side. They updated their documentation and published 2 years ago a new one. So actually this is also very important, is really to have this documentation. Mainly it's the same, but we have to adapt it to climate change. So we are testing also substrates and plant association on green roofs to see how will they adapt when we will have more dry seasons or long durating season during the summer, like last summer. So so this is new effects we have to consider, and we have to test and do research on it, and then just offer new opportunities to all these kind of cities or the confederation to adapt their guidelines and what they just want to publish and communicate to the different parties. Next slide, please. What started last year, for example, is also one important thing to just push such movements or such measures like green roofs or facade, is also the model of Basel City is actually to give subsidies, so to financially support the action with a percentage of money during, let's put it that way, maybe a campaign for 1 year, where you just where the city has fundings to support any owners to just maybe refurbish the roof or restore it, or new buildings, and to bring in facades and as well green roofs. And this incentive is one of the first in Switzerland, started in Zurich, is a program with subsidies for green facades. So actually, just to put also in a line of timeline where we stand there. So we need always these kind of actions to get on, you know, to move on, that other cities will copy that or start to do it, and just see what is the effect on it, how many people will participate and use these subsidies, and so on. So that's actually the way things move on in Switzerland. So next. Exactly. And one thing we did from the university was we just published that 1 year ago, and it's at the moment only in German, was a study which was demanded by the federal by the Institute of how is it called again, by the BAFU, which is the Environmental Institute of the Confederation, and they asked us to have an overview of the national application and actions about green roofs, green facades, and the animal aided design method. So, and we did this study as university and combined with the HEPIA in Geneva and also some contacts in the Italian speaking part to have a broad perspective about what is the practice in Switzerland at the moment, let's say 1 or 2 years ago, because it was published last year, and to see where we stand. So next slide, please. And just a few slides about that. So it was really the 3 topics, as I said, it's the potential of the buildings. That was actually the study. And also, is it really used for biodiversity? Is it really done and built in for quality of life for people as well, but also for species? And next slide, please. So the main goal is to show within good practice and some examples what is happening in Switzerland. And we had really to find out what are the different criteria to say what is a good project, was a good practice project, which was not really that easy. And we had to be representative for the whole Swiss perspectives and national-wise. So we did actually work in a way to just ask different stakeholders who are dealing with this kind of measures, but also working in the field of construction, and also with cities, with administrations, and researchers, etc., to just get a picture, a broad picture about what is the practice. Next slide, please. So we worked in the way that we just took buildings from the public sector, from the private sector. We had also subject areas and also topics we developed in this study, which were about the care, the maintenance, and of course we showed up good practice examples. And we had also one topic which was important for the Confederation. It was a communication. So we worked with a communication office together in this study just to bring down the main principle essence in words which are not too scientific, but also have in the back scientific knowledge and also report that in the study as well, but actually to bring down for each different stakeholders, like the main essence of taking out, and this in a language which is understandable if you are now an architect, a landscape architect, or a constructor, or if you are just an owner. Next slide, please. And here maybe just for you to read, we did interviews with this different, we also just took some different partners. For example, here for the EFB, it was Erich Steiner from the SFG, so our national federation of green roofs, green walls, etc. And so that was their communication, what they think, what is needed, and that we are somehow standing somewhere in a, we didn't really move that fast as we thought that 20 years ago, for example. So there's a lot still to do, and especially for the combination biosolar and green roof. So actually, so there is really still a lot to do. So although maybe some countries think that we are far ahead with green roofs, I would say nowadays not each green roof, which is a bit provocative, in Switzerland each green flat roof is green. So we have still a lot to do. And here maybe down there is still also the architect citation quotes, which is very much important because we wanted also the planning side to have their meaning and their comments on it. And I think there is a shift starting, and they show us today what they could do, and that an interdisciplinary perspective and planning of project is very important to get these results we want to have and we aim to have. Next slide, please. So here maybe just go, is just to show up what these topics, how they were built up, what kind of criteria we had, and how we just showed them. But if you go to the next slide, I can show, I guess, yeah. It's like the overall map of Switzerland, where you see where where lots of dots are is in the Swiss-German part of Switzerland. Then you have on the left below side in the corner, left corner down there, there's a French-speaking part, and then on the right-hand side where you have like 2 dots is the Italian-speaking part. So actually this is also representative. As I told before at the beginning, Basel City, so the Swiss German-speaking part was the first just moving 20 years ago. So it took time to go down, and because, I mean, this is like different culture, different languages, although we can speak all these languages normally, but still is another way to deal and to have all these topics within the cities and the practitioners. So next slide. So the example was shown like that. That's in Geneva, for example. So this is a whole building, is a cooperative who just built that. It's completely ecological and it's completely sustainable also in the way it uses the water, gray and black water, and it has green facades and green roofs. So actually all is combined here, as I would now prefer nowadays buildings are built and planned. And so we showed that in that way. So we gave some figures, of course. We just show a map where this is, where you can find that, give some insights about the cost, etc. Next slide, please. And then, of course, with pictures and more text, which I don't show you now, but is in the report or in the study, we can also just show different aspects of it, as we just worked also with the HEPIA. So this is where their part to show us the plans, the pictures, so that we can also explain why we choose this, for example, as a good example, because, and we'd also integrated in the text some comments from the architect, from the landscape architects, what were the challenges, what were the best thing, etc., and so on. But of course, now here is to point out is a cooperative, and from the start, and this is one of the main points we just get out of the study, is of course, if we implement everybody within the process, and the best would be, of course, the people who live afterwards in it, then you get really the good examples, because this is a hard work of many years of discussion between the architects and the people who are going to live in it and the cooperative. But the end, actually, when you go there and you visit them, you talk to the people there, everybody's really happy about the results, because it was that what they really imagined. Of course, there were resets, there were changes done within the process, but still that's what they imagined at the beginning and could be built in the end. It's a special case, I admit it, but I think we can come close to it also in other projects. It's really to have all the people integrated. Okay, next slide, please. And here are just to summarize what were just actually the first approaches or essence out of the project. And I didn't mention a lot now, but an animal-aided design method, or how to integrate life cycle of animals within this processing and planning steps. But actually, we found out that this is not really common, because animal-aided design is a method coming from Germany. And many people heard about that in Switzerland, but it's not really implemented in the process. So that's one of the 3 things where we found out that's very far away, and we have to do a lot to come close to really bring this in the process. Then, of course, you can hear here you have conflicts between green roofs and photovoltaic, which still is on, as I mentioned before. Then, of course, legal basis, force, obligation, or is it something you do freely because you think is a good idea, is still something we talk about here. Of course, Basel City has a law which demands in the construction codes that green flat roofs have to be greened. It makes it easier because then it's just implemented. But still, we should work also on a free basis, on a voluntary basis, to bring this forward. Of course, lack of experts, contact person, especially in communities, municipalities, is a lack of money. Can you really give their incentives, etc.? So actually, there are still political, economical issues we just found out. But also is also to start all from the beginning, the planning process, integrating all these measures is very important to really come to an end that green roofs, green facades are implemented. So this is actually, so if I summarize these essences. Last slide. Yeah, so I'm sorry, but a little bit over time, but thanks a lot. And I'm looking forward of Dusty's presentation and of course of your question later on.
Thank you very much. Can you please try to show something so I can close it, because I don't see the window with. So just to interrupt me showing the screen.
Shall I share my screen?
Yes, if it's possible, because it's always a problem. Thank you.
I just shared it, but
yes, thank you very much, Natalia, for this inspiring presentation. It's so nice to see how things are going on in Switzerland. And yes, next presentation is Dusty Gedge.
Yeah. So I'm going to get into the granular detail. I'm going to be quite brusque, but just there is kind of the things that I'm going to cover over the 26 years that I've been involved in this. You know, why biodiversity, how biodiversity links to other benefits, which Natalie has referred to, and how to design for biodiversity. Now, most of the viewers are from Europe. I can see some colleagues from Canada and elsewhere, but that kind of works for Canada and the United States of America and any temperate zone, even in South America. Once we get to subtropical, I will talk a little bit about intensive green roofs at the end. And one of the big things that's happening in England, not in the whole of the UK, is biodiversity net gain. And I'm going to mention that briefly because there's a lot of countries interested in how England is doing its biodiversity net gain, and green roofs are part of that process. Very quickly, I got involved in this 26 years because of a rare bird in the United Kingdom, which is the black redstart. And through all those processes, I've got heavily involved in writing planning policy and celebrating planning policy. In the bottom corner is a report that I did with the EFB for the London government, celebrating 10 years of the London policy. But I'm going to start with a natural habitat. And it's interesting, I noticed there's a gentleman from Greece. About 4 weeks ago, I was down in Attica looking at similar habitats to this. This is a cockleshell beach in Kent, where I'm from. And I'm now going to show you two pictures. One is the cockleshell beach and one is a green roof. And the point there is we can actually replicate habitats that are out in the wider countryside on green roofs, and this is a green roof in the City of London. And most of these principles, to be fair to Natalie, are because I went to Switzerland in 2000 and brought back many of the ideas that have been researched by the Hot School Wadensville. So when we
Dusty,
talk about
can I please interrupt you? We still see the first slide. If you are moving through the slides, we don't see it.
Can you see
and now it's closed again.
Can you see any of the slides?
No, now we don't see any slide.
Fuck's sake.
Something going on with Teams today.
I can't stand Teams, to be quite frank. Do you see it now?
Yes,
and try to change
the first slide. Maybe you should move, slide by slide here. Then we will see the changes.
Can you see that change?
Yes, now we see. Sorry.
Right, okay, I shall carry on, don't worry. So briefly to recap, it's very important. This is the bird that I mentioned earlier, the black redstart, and I got involved in these policies. But I want to focus a bit here. This is a natural habitat. This is the cockleshell beach I referred to. And wherever I go in Europe, I try and find habitats like this to see what's growing there, because that's what will grow on a green roof. If you look closely, that is the cockleshell beach, and that is actually a green roof. It's actually this green roof. And so we can actually replicate these dry habitats that we have all over temperate zones in the world and all over Europe. And I think the important thing to note from what Natalie was saying is Switzerland is in the center of Europe, and what works in Ticino can possibly work in the Mediterranean, and what works in Schweizerdeutsch can work in Northern Europe. And I think the ideas that I brought back from Switzerland, we can demonstrate that you can transpose those ideas to essentially a maritime climate, which is what London is. So this is where I got to. The important elements, and I think we're going to share these slides with you, is to ensure that the depth of the substrate is right. And I suspect that if you're in the Mediterranean region, you would want to increase that to 100 to 200 millimeters. And that will make the roofs, when you design them for biodiversity, resilient to droughts and heat waves. We've had a lot of heat waves in London over the last 5 years. And though the green roofs die, they generally bounce back. So by designing for biodiversity, it actually helps the other environmental issues, particularly the urban heat island, the increased stormwater amelioration, and increase in insulation value in the winter and the summer, because you've got a deeper substrate. Now, I always say this to people because there's a lot of ecologists want to restore. We can only replicate at a green roof level. A green roof is an artificial, it's an artificial habitat, and replication is the story here. And it's interesting. I know Pavel from Czech is here. I know the Czechs have been looking at brownfield land, and certainly in nature conservation in the UK over 20 years, our brownfield lands have been recognised as some of the most important places for invertebrates in the United Kingdom. And it doesn't look like a pristine wilderness, but that is of high value to a whole range of about 50 or 60 very rare species of invertebrates. And I will come back to this at the end. This is a place near me. I can't get a picture before it was developed, but I had to do some bird surveys of this site over 24 years ago. And down at the bottom it says there were 7 to 10 pairs of linnets, which is an interesting finch found across Europe, whose population has collapsed in my lifetime across Europe. So that's just to bring it in. So I got involved and we started designing these so-called brown roofs, and this is one of them filmed in July 2008. And the idea of our approach and the Swiss approach, though this term at the top there is an English term, open mosaic habitat, is essentially a dry grassland habitat that you find on post-industrial landscapes. And these landscapes, as I've said, are very, very important for a whole range of rare invertebrates, animals, and floral communities. And this is the original brown roof that was installed in 2002. And I collected seeds and seeded it with seeds from around my neighbourhood. And this then became policy in London. Not all green roofs are delivered as open mosaic habitat, but the vast majority of them are. And a flagship species for me, and you would find it in Switzerland, and I actually found this species on the rocks of Piraeus in Greece, is Echium vulgare, which is just a flagship species. If you've got Echium vulgare on there, you've probably got a good green roof if it's in London. I'm going to send in the chat a link to this document. This is a summary of all the research that we did in London and they did in Switzerland on providing habitat for rare invertebrates at green roofs. I mean, it's over 13 years old, but it's still applicable. And again, it's applicable across the whole of Europe. You just have to adapt it to, particularly in the southern climates where, you know, it's hotter and you may need deeper substrate. And the basis of this is, for the ecologists amongst you, is spiders. They're the tigers of the dry grasslands. And if you have a range of spider species, from ambush spiders that like it bare to web spiders that need to produce webs, it means you've got a diversity of vegetation and a diversity of structure, which means you've maximized your green roof for biodiversity. And there's a little cross section. It's the construction industry doesn't like bumpy. We like bumpy, if I can be slightly amusing. And as I said, you know, it's the depth of substrate, the topographic variety. It's seeded and planted with native wildflowers, but also sedums, because we found during the hot periods, the sedums actually support the wildflowers through periods of excess heat, dead wood, rubble mounds, and it gives you a review of the research in Switzerland. And this is basically the basis of what is known as biodiversity net gain metric for green roofs. If you put a green roof up and you've got to get your biodiversity net gain score in England from November, this is what defines a good green roof, what I've just shown you. And that will not meet the metric. And that is, I can tell you now, that's a 40 millimeter sedum blanket roof actually in Belgium. And again, that is not performing for biodiversity. It's got relatively low value for urban heat island effect, relatively low value for stormwater remediation. And therefore, as I said at the start, designing for biodiversity can actually increase the environmental services that an extensive green roof can provide to the city, to the building. And if you do one of those, you will get a poor score, which could actually affect the development. And I don't want to go into the details of biodiversity net gain, but for people in Europe, Belgium, Norway, I believe, and Switzerland, their national environment agencies are actually in discussion with what is known as DEFRA in the UK to see how this goes, because they would like to take forward a biodiversity net gain process in their own countries. And I expect a lot of European countries are going to look to that. And that's not about celebrating London or England. It's just, we just happen to have done it first. So here's a roof in the shadow of St. Paul's, which has been designed along these principles. And here's another one. I'm just giving you a visual, a bit of visual. But I thought I did a tour of roofs in Italy last year in Lombardy and Piedmont. And again, this roof is very, very interesting because what you can see in front is essentially a biodiverse green roof. It has about 40 species of wildflowers on it. And to the side is a sedum roof. And slowly but surely, the wildflowers are colonizing the sedum roofs. And this is irrigated to a certain extent, but at that time, June last year, there was a massive drought in that part of Italy, I believe, and there was no irrigation. And actually, I've heard since that actually not irrigating actually improved the roof because it killed off a lot of the grasses which were starting to dominate it, which is what we were finding in the UK. A drought can actually have a positive effect on a green roof in the next year. So you don't just have to do them in cities. It's in a vineyard in a place called Priocca. And what is important about that from a biodiversity point of view is the vineyard owner has said the benefit of the green roof has been lower temperatures in term where his wine is stored, but it's increased pollination. And he was very direct to me. Pollination is really important in a vineyard. And he says he's the envy of his other vineyard owners. Often there's a conflict between biodiversity and people. And certainly during COVID, I think we could challenge this because I noticed that people wanted to sit in long grass in London, not in neat and tidy areas. And the people who are on this in this picture, all people who work in this building, who all said to me they would love to come and sit by this roof and have a coffee. And oops, I've missed it. I'll just come to this one. And I was in Zurich last year as well in June, and this is a restaurant on a commercial development which has a native wildflower roof. And it's the point that we can deliver biodiversity where people go. It doesn't have to be ordered and tidy. I was led to believe that somebody might be visiting us from Malaysia, so I thought I'd put this picture of an intensive green roof in Singapore in. The key thing with intensive green roofs, which are basically roof gardens or, they're accessible roofs, is that you need to get a mix of native and non-native. And there's a lot of roofs now being designed in London where there's these drifts of perennials and native wildflowers amongst the more ornamental bushes and soil. But the key thing is 70% soil and vegetation, including water features. And this actually goes back to 1992 from the city of Karlsruhe in Germany, which made this as a guideline for intensive green roofs within the city of Karlsruhe. And just to highlight this, there's again the roof in Switzerland, is this roof, which is in Paris, is a fascinating roof, and Natalie knows it because I visited it with Natalie 10 years ago. It's got a variety of food, it's got wheat, it's got stinging nettles, it's got Mediterranean gardens, and it's to try and demonstrate all the things that are possible on a roof of this type. And it's actually a massive community centre now, and there's a cafe up there. And certainly in a lot of cities around Europe, companies have recognised that actually having access, staff access and people access, that these intensive green roofs, are a good thing. This one is nearly 70% non-native, which is a shame. It should really be 50% native, 50% non-native if it was for biodiversity. And this is another one in London above a railway station for a very famous accountancy firm. Again, this picture was taken when it was about 70% non-native and 30% native, and they've now changed it due to nature reporting to be 50-50 this year. And I just love this picture. It's a library in the centre of England where a gentleman in autumn is reading a book surrounded by nature. And this roof is delivering for biodiversity because it's 50-50 native, non-native. And within our biodiversity metric, we actually have a metric which states all the things that I've said to you. 70% soil and vegetation. That's what will deliver biodiversity on an intensive green roof. And, you know, it is possible. I'm really a nature conservation person, but I got asked to design this roof. They wanted it ornamental because it's a famous museum and it's famous for its gardening. So I got inspired by a friend of mine who uses a lot of yuccas and aloes from the Canary Islands and from Mexico. But it was also had a biodiversity condition as planning. So the whole roof has been seeded with what we call the London Living Roof seed mix. And this is slowly going through. And if you ever happen to go to London, you can actually see this green roof as you enter the museum. It's the Museum of Home. So it's possible to mix, you know, being very, very native, but also providing this decorative kind of roof garden. It's not the kind of thing I normally do, but actually it was quite fun and quite interesting. And going back to Italy, this is the Fiat, the famous Fiat racing track, which was converted into a green roof 2 years ago. And again, around here is a mix of non-native and native. And I was absolutely amazed at the number of pollinators, carpenter bees, some of the pollinators I couldn't recognize. And I have a series of videos that should be out in the next month about the rocks of Piraeus and about a couple of the roofs I visited in Switzerland and Italy, which shows the possibility. And I like to think of this roof as providing a landscape for the future from a place which was from the past. Certainly it was a fossil fuel building, if you get what I mean. And there it is again, right in the heart of Turin. Natalie's mentioned this, and I'm going to be very brief, but it is possible to combine solar and biodiversity, and we call them biosolar roofs, and it was an innovation that came out of Switzerland. And certainly one of the largest ones in London was done for the London Olympics, and it met 12 of the 14 biodiversity targets. Not even the Olympic Park managed to do that. So we can deliver. This is one near actually where Hochschule Wädenswil. And you can see this is a biosolar roof packed with native wildflowers. And I've designed several of these in London, and we have a very rare small blue butterfly in the UK called the small blue. And this is the first time there was actual empiric evidence of it using green roofs. I've seen it before, but I never got a photograph. So combining solar and green roofs is a very good idea. And I just wanted to put this in because this is an innovation again from Switzerland. Natalie had a picture of this in her presentation, but this is the future because 100% of the green roof is available for biodiversity, but it's still producing renewable energy. And the Hochschule Wädenswil has done a lot of research on these roofs. And there's going to be a whole stream at the World Green Infrastructure Congress on biosolar roofs, solar and green roofs, which is going to be interesting. I'm just highlighting that because as the president, I do have to promote my German Association's event in Berlin at the end of June. So I'm a bit of a sad guy. I like to go around and collect seeds and throw them on green roofs. And I learned to do this on this roof. This is about 2008. And I was given another roof, which is completely bare, was not seeded. And over 5 years, I collected seeds from all over my region, and I threw them on the roof. And this is where I get to the end. So this is nearly 148 species of native species from Southeast England. Some of them are not available commercially. And I want to create a seed mix which we can use across London to actually really increase the biodiversity. And the key thing is the linnet. 3 years ago, I found over 40 linnets feeding on this roof in June and July, and the linnet has collapsed in my lifetime in England, but across Europe, and that roof is now delivering more linnets in the neighbourhood because all those yellow circles are green roofs that have been designed for biodiversity, and the linnet population has increased, which I find quite moving actually. And this was the most sustainable retail store in 1999 on the Greenwich Peninsula. IKEA came along, which was the one I've seen at the top, and was built on that site and was the most sustainable retail store in 2019. And I end all of my talks these days, what will be the most sustainable retail store in 2039? And it will be a retail store that's delivering for biodiversity. And there's the roof last year. Next week is World Green Roof Day, by the way. I have to say that because I'm the front and the Federation is actively involved in World Green Roof Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dusty. Thank you for your presentation. I think we can move on with Q&A session. Yeah. And maybe we'll not open any slides so the speakers are visible for the participants. And we will start with the first question in the chat from Steve Cope. He was wondering if there is a general view on soil in green infrastructure, and he's interested in the way soil develop in this context, given that it is necessary for time for a lapse before organic matter and true in situ soil is present. Also, the importance of microbial processes in new soil.
Right. I think, Natalie, this is where we might find a difference between Switzerland and the United Kingdom. So I'll let you go in a minute, but I won't take Natalie's thunder. We have very developed blended substrates in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Austria. They have them in Switzerland as well, which are blended. They're made from lots of different materials, brick, and essentially an extensive green roof substrate should have only 20% organic material in. Certainly in some parts of Switzerland, I'm going to hand over to Natalie, they will use natural aggregates. Will you not, Natalie?
Yeah. Well, we just use natural soil.
Yeah.
Not even depending now from our university, but we have also, I mean, that's what you want to mention from England. Actually, there's a market, which you all know, where you can get the substrate, and you're pointing out this type of substrate. I think so because we are trying from the university, and the city of Basel has this also in her guidelines, that they use natural soil or mixed soil, which have really natural components like gravel, sands, excavation soil, etc. So that actually all living organisms are already in it. So we don't have to put them extra on it to get like a living soil. And the good question is how long coming from the perspective of natural based solution of soils is actually we don't have figures or measurements that we can show up now after 20 years how the soil quality is, but we can just see how the vegetation is on the top of it. Is there still something growing, or still vegetating flowers, etc. And from this perspective, which is only observation, is not scientifically proved, we can of course see that there are nutrition coming into the soil from the air, from of course the plants with the life cycle, so with humus, and so biodegradation, and we can say that it can last. We have one example. This is the only one which is over 100 years, and Dusty knows it. And there we could show actually even after 100 years with the same technique, is also natural soil, there's absolutely no degradation of the substrate. So because we have orchids on it, we have rare plants on it, which you can't find in the whole region around Zurich anymore. So it's a water power station or plant station where they then use it for clean or how you call it in English, Dusty?
I'm not sure it was wet. It's wet meadow soil, wasn't it, which was used
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
volleys?
But actually, roofs are actually where they just clean the water from the lake to.
Oh, sorry. It's the Moose filtration plant. It's where water is filtered underneath the green roof. And just as an aside, and I'll come to, if you don't mind, Natalie, not taking your thunder, is I love this because I'm English, and it was designed by British engineers and it overheated in the first year. So the Swiss went, that's not very smart. So they just dumped farmyard soil on it with some gravel underneath it. And that is actually what they did. And will in a minute put a link into a video about Volleysoften for the gentleman who asked the question or anybody else, because I've got a whole video on the Moose filtration plant. In terms of soil microbiotics, there has been some research done that in the UK by a lady called Heather Rumble, but the original research was actually only done on very basic sedum roofs. And the deeper the substrate, the more likely the soil macrobiotics is going to be. But I know that we know from Switzerland, I think I'm right in saying, Natalie, and also my colleague in Sweden, but they're looking at adding biochar, high-grade biochar, which can increase the moisture retention and can actually increase the soil biota. My personal view is I'm not over worried because we're trying to replicate brownfield open mosaic, which is actually very, very stressed. But that's just my opinion. I hope that answers the question. Do you want to add anything, Natalie?
No, I'm fine with that. I have nothing to add.
Next question then, eh? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So we move to the next question from Anne. Currently, she's writing a thesis at the university, which is about the possibilities of the CO2 calculation in the direction of green roofs. Are there any significant methods on or exact numbers how much CO2 can be saved by these constructions?
A good question. From my side, I don't have now. We didn't have, none of the university in Switzerland has done measures of this type yet. So you have something international?
Well, I mean, to be honest, we get asked this all the time. With the current green roofs, they do sequester a small amount of carbon, but not a huge amount. But I suppose every bit helps. I don't want to get too into this, but whoever's asked this question, she can drop me an email. But I've been working for 5 years on a completely carbon neutral green roof where the products have all captured or offset carbon. And it's quite a long process. So actually, when the green roof is installed, it has captured and could continue to capture some carbon in the future. But I don't want to go too much into detail about that. But essentially, any green roof that goes up is actually carbon positive because the products would have traveled from all over the place. And in some parts, and again, I have to be careful how we say this, we're using aggregates that have been fired and therefore are quite carbon heavy. I've just put a link into the YouTube channel on the orchid roof.
Thank you. And also the other question, have you considered the below ground microbiodiversity which can interact with other macrobiodiversity? That's the question to Dusty, I think.
Yeah, Philip, I think I answered that when I answered the first question. Is as I said, there's some work going on looking at adding biochar, high-grade biochar, and the deeper the substrate, the better what microbiotic activity is in the soil will survive the periods of heat. But green roofs are very stressed environments. And I suspect if you looked at the Cockleshell Beach in Sea Salter and looked at a green roof, the microbiotic activity would be probably quite similar, is my intuition. I hope that answers it, Philip. But if you want to chat, just drop me an email, yeah? I'll be interested to know your opinion, Philip. So that's why if you want to email me, you can.
We have the question, if there are any specific, I think it's Biosol standard for green roof in UK or any code of practice?
I can answer that. There is, the Grow Code has a code of practice for biosolar. There is fire guidance for green roofs, which includes solar, which is a big thing in the UK. It's a big thing across Europe, and we've had several seminars on fire at the EFB. There's new guidance coming up from across Europe, actually, and the fire guidance will say a green roof should have 80 millimeters of substrate. Now, with the biosolar, there's still some conversations, which is due to stuff coming out of Dublin, where they're refusing to, they don't want solar panels going on green roofs, but that's not the case in England. Again, whoever asked that, Maria Innes, I think you're actually from Dublin, aren't you? If you want to drop me an email or talk to me on LinkedIn, we can discuss that. Yeah. All right.
And one more question to Dusty. Are there some green roofs open to the public that would be a good example of biodiversity? Can you name some, please?
Sorry about this, Natalie. 120 Fenchurch Street is open to the public Monday to Saturday during working hours. It's an intensive green roof, but it's actually covered in wisteria. So you could argue that it's very good for biodiversity. And there's 3 pairs of goldfinches nesting in the wisteria. And again, I have a video of that coming out soon because I was just really impressed. And it's 15 stories high. I think there's quite a few in Switzerland, and there's quite a few across Europe. I think there's somebody from Poland. There's a famous, I think it's Walsall Library, which is accessible. I don't know how good it is for biodiversity, but I've not visited that one.
Yes, we have some in Vienna, but
yeah.
Dusty, how do you treat weeds when bringing seeds from all our existing grasslands?
Well, very quickly, I'm very specific how I collect my seeds, and some of the seeds that I collect, some people would consider were weeds, but they're not weeds for me. Grass is weeds for me on a green roof, I'm afraid, because grasses in a wet winter can just push everything out. And I have arguments with the grassland specialists. I've just started seeding IKEA with 2 species because I don't want grasses to dominate.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah. I think we got one from Karen, haven't we? Karen Liu, old friend of mine from Canada. Hello, yes. Karen.
So you see Christine the question, well. Yes?
Yeah.
Karen and Christine, both from Canada.
Yes, so many municipalities in North America are promoting native plants on green roofs to promote local pollinators. You have stressed on the importance of 50-50 mix of native and non-native for biodiversity success. Could you please elaborate a little on the rationale? Thank you.
That's from Christine. Well, the rationale was from Karlsruhe, and it just seemed to me and colleagues that horticulturalists will want to, in the UK, put in stuff that's not necessarily native because we don't have a huge showy flora and fauna. So we went, well, you've got to compromise because an intensive green roof is got a horticultural design element to it. So I just suggested we go with the Karlsruhe policy because it just seems sensible that you get a mix of native and non-native. And that would work in terms of the urban greening factor in London and across the UK when it comes across the UK. I mean, what do you think, Natalie? I mean, we're now talking intensive green roofs, you know.
Well, we don't have that much experience on intensive green roofs, but we of course, I come from more the extensive side where we try as well to have as much as possible native plants. I think this is also with the climate adaptation, which I tried to say before, we have to see that and test in future because maybe also some of the natives won't support that much drafts in the future, which we had last year, for example. So we need to find a good relation and good ratio between. So we still, and we don't have that much intensive. So I think it will come up maybe in the next years. But yeah, it's just to follow and see what Europe does, what UK does in future with this kind of seed mixture ratio or plants you're going to choose for.
Could I add to that, Natalie, if you don't mind, yeah. Karen? Because I know Karen Liu. The trouble is, we're referring to intensive green roofs there, Karen, not extensive green roofs. And obviously, from my experience, basic sedums are pretty much the dominance in the North American market. At an extensive level, I think you can do what we do in Switzerland and London, just getting the right seed mixes, that's all, and the native plugs, which I know is being looked at in Alberta by Kerry Ross, who you know, Karen, I think. Move on to the next one.
Yes, question to Dusty and Natalie. What framework would you recommend for North American cities in process of developing green roof policy to include biodiversity and AAD? For example, green factor, other links appreciated.
Well, I would have thought, to be honest, and again, I've got to be careful if I may, Natalie, I'll go first, is many of my colleagues in ecology are not convinced with what England's doing in terms of biodiversity net gain, but in terms of biodiversity net gain and green roofs, I think it's a really good way forward for cities, because you get a score, and you've got to score 10%. Now, I think also in deference to Natalie and the city of Basel, Basel has been the strongest city in the world in terms of biodiversity, and I think American cities could learn a lot from what Basel's done. Do you want to add anything to that, Natalie?
Well, I think, if you have a law in the construction code, I mean, then it's an obligation, and that's still the best case. Even I'm not really for that, but I think if you want to move something nowadays, it is the best way to do it. The rest, we also start to talk about this green factor, the green surface factor, also relied on Berlin, the biotop factor there. So because everybody wants to know how many percentage, also thinking about the ground level, you know, with parks and meadows and lawns and etc., not only building, is how many percentage do I have to have green, and how many does it have to be biodiverse, etc. So we are just at the point now to develop recommendation on that. We are as well involved. I'm involved in this kind of work study again, but it's very difficult to find a good way, because in the end it's about quality, and quality I think you can't put in a figure like percentage, you know. Is it 10, 50 percentage? But that doesn't mean that the quality is right. So we have to be very careful about that. And I would say, if you have a law like it's Basel City, but Christine, you know it actually, then you will have again documentation which explains how this roof has to look like. That it suits the law, that it suits the demand of the city, which is actually then the leverage of it. So that the city is strong to say we want it this way or that way. Otherwise, it doesn't work, you know. And this is actually that's the best case to have. If you can implement that in North America, Canada, yeah.
I mean, if I can add something again with the biodiversity net gain, quality is implicit in the biodiversity net gain. So there's a lot of really bad green roofs go up all over, but it's implicit in the biodiversity net gain that the habitat, in this case a green roof, has to be monitored for 5 years, has to demonstrate net gain, and has to be monitored up to 30 years from the day it goes in. Now, whether that's going to happen, because 30 years is a long time, implicit in it is you've got to demonstrate you've delivered that habitat. So if you put a really bad sedum roof up and claim it's a good biodiverse green roof, monitoring will demonstrate that that's not the case. Yeah. So that's what's another good thing about the net gain. Yeah. I just think we ought to move on to the last two. I think we've got two more, haven't we?
Yes, we have comment from Neil, who's really interested in retrofitting roofs, both on residential buildings and industrial area, and he's interested in ways of cooperation, as I understood. If I could get one example this could go national very easily. I would love any associations that I could link up with to promote the adoption of green roofs for biodiversity, natural cooling, insulation, energy, water.
I've read it. Neil, is Neil based in the UK? Can you just put it in the chat? Because then again, maybe connect to me on LinkedIn and we can work out how we might do that. But I think Natalie would agree with me. You mentioned industrial areas. When you get very, very large industrial sheds, that is very, very difficult for the industrial shed industry to deal with because it significantly increases the load. Now, I've been to a lot of industrial sheds around Germany, Switzerland and Austria where because of legal, because it's mandatory, they've had to do it. But where it's not mandatory, it's really, really difficult. And certainly already with biodiversity net gain, there's some industrial sheds up in the northeast of England where they're going to just pay a load of money to an offset site because they're not going to put a green roof up. And that's where there's a weakness in the biodiversity net gain because you can also deliver offsite if you can. It's a very, very big challenge, industrial sheds. Don't get me wrong, I'd love it to happen, but it's a significant challenge. Natalie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have nothing to add, but I agree. You're right. It's challenging. Yeah, it's not impossible, but it's challenging. Yeah.
I think this next question is quite an interesting one. Verghese.
Yes. What is the residents' response to the biodiversity that comes with these interventions? Is there any recorded case where it has improved their interest in developing other biodiversity-related interventions?
I don't know of any research. I do know of some research actually in Chicago and Toronto about people looking out onto extensive green roofs, and where they looked out on a prairie type green roof, they seemed to be more satisfied than if they didn't. And that's by Angela Loader. I think she's changed her name now, another friend of mine from Canada. I can't think of any specifically, but intuitively, I suspect if people had access to a lot of the roofs in London or in Switzerland, I think you'd find that they really would love them as those wild spaces. That's just my intuition.
Yes, we have a question. What do you think of cedar mats laid on the ground, Vinco, Bergknapp, compared with the vegetation made from seeds on cutting? Is one better than the other?
Just on ground, you mean on the ground or on the rooftop?
On the roof or the ground?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Oh.
On the roof. Well, we've got to avoid companies here, but...
Shall I answer?
No, you go, Natalie. You go. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's easier for me to answer it because I'm from a university. We just actually don't work with sedum mats because if you work on biodiversity, to have sedum as one of the species you will have as a species collection on a roof is okay, is fine. But actually, sedum roofs is not biodiversity improvement. It has some effects. I'm not against sedum, but we don't work with mats because we just, as I said, we take natural soil, put that on the roof to make it really easy. And if you watch the video of Dusty, so actually it's the methods the Vikings used to do, and we did it, or they did it in Wollishofen with the orchids more than 100 years ago. So we just do that kind of type. So I would say, especially thinking about climate change, adaptation, zero carbon, etc., you shouldn't really use too many materials, too many cultivated, because there's always materials involved in some cases, and you have to really be so natural, not nature-based solutions, well known, I would say, to develop your roofs, to implement them, to plan them, whatever. So this is, and I can say I have seen lots of sedum roofs, carpets in Paris, which didn't really work. So that was really like, it was horrible to watch. And it was, yeah, so I would say if it's possible not to use them, just don't do.
Okay, can I answer now? I'm answering as an individual and not as the president. Now, I'm only president for a month and I retire after 16 years. I've been basically fighting for 26 years against sedum carpets. The issue there is it's because of the designers want the lightest solution. And if you want the lightest solution, that's about having the lightest solution. That's not about delivering environmental performance. And sedum carpets are very rarely used in mature markets like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And they're getting less and less used, certainly in London. And I noticed, Gail, you're from, I suspect, from the Netherlands or from Belgium, I presume with the name Vervoort. And the trouble is there is the Dutch market is very, very much dominated by seed and blankets. And that's where we need the cities to demand processes which require good biodiversity. And I think I'll end it on that, else I could get myself into trouble.
Well, I can say just there are solutions. We did lightweight solutions without using seeded mats, but I think it would take too far. We could do another time, another webinar about this, but just drop me a line if you want to know more about it. It's also nature-based solution as well. So with another organic materials we are using, but they are absolutely, we can adapt that to any static situation. So that's my answer to it.
Thank you. The question about tropical climate. What about green roof in tropical climate? Is there any specific requirement?
Okay, I'll quickly go do this one. Yeah. So when you're in a tropical and subtropical climate, there are some extensive green roofs in places like Auckland, which is semi-subtropical. But in tropical, the times like in places like Thailand and Singapore, and even in Hong Kong, they've tried to use like an extensive green roof system, like in a temperate zone, and they just don't work. They can't survive the heat. So that's why I mentioned intensive green roofs is really the way forward if you're in a tropical climate like Singapore or Rio de Janeiro. I'm trying to think of tropical places, or in along the equator in Africa, because you've got the rain, you can put trees on, and generally actually commercial buildings are built quite strong. So in tropical, focus on intensive roof gardens. In subtropical, the further north or south you go towards the pole, you can do a bit of what they call intensive and semi-intensive, where you've got the kind of wildflowers, but you've got to be nearer the pole than nearer the equator for that. It's not my area of expertise, but that's generally what I understand from people I know from Hong Kong and Singapore and other tropical regions.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we went through all the questions. Please remind us in the chat if we missed some questions here. And yes, we have many. Thank you to Natalie and Dusty for sharing your experience. It's really, really valuable that you found the time to prepare the slides about this current situation in Europe. Thank you very much to our sponsors who supported this webinar, to Leica International, Dachgrün GmbH, Sechsfürst Grün, and Foam Glass Cellular Glass Insulation. And yes, we shared the links in chat for our social media pages in LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. This webinar was recorded. Hopefully we will arrange it and upload it, and we will share a link with you, so maybe you can rewatch it later. And there is a link to the World Congress on Green Building in Berlin, so you still can register and to participate online or on site to learn more about those topics. Thank you to all the participants for your participation, your questions. It's very nice to have such an active and interested audience, and we will do more webinars in the future, so stay connected with us. And yes, thank you.
See you on World Green Roof Day, Christine. She just said.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you,
Tatiana. Thank you, Dusty.
And well done, Tatiana. Well done, Tatiana. Yeah. Thank you.
So, goodbye. Have a nice evening.